The largest Jewish community on earth is the greater New York Jewish community, larger than Yerushalayim, larger than Tel Aviv. They did a study on themselves, okay? I'm pulling the Orthodox out of that study right now. Let's take the Orthodox out. The average Jewish man or woman in New York gets married at 34 and a half years old. We raise our children to get married at a younger age, to start building a family at a much younger age. But we happen to live in an economy where to thrive, to be able to support yourself, your spouse, your children in this economy, you may need 2 graduate degrees. You have to be at the cutting edge. And you don't become someone who's making significant money until you've worked your way up. Whether that's in a company like Google or Amazon, or whether that's in a law firm, in a medical practice, whether that is at a financial institution. So what happens? We don't want our kids getting married at 34 and a half. We want our children developing families at a younger age, having children of their own at a younger age. But economically, how do you fund that? So we, the parents, there's 3 Rashi Tevos that we become. It's called ATM. That's right, we become ATM machines. Not because our kids are lazy. Whether we want our kid learning in the Kollel, whether our kid is in a PhD program, whether our kid is a resident, a medical residency, we have to fund them. But that causes an inherent problem. Number one, from a religious point of view, it's very unhealthy to be dependent upon other human beings. Lo lidei matnas basar v'dam, v'lo lidei halvasa. We plead with Ribono Shalom every time we bench, and in our tefillos, not to be dependent upon others, only on God Almighty. But we have a system, in order for our kids to function as adults, we have to fund them. But now what? I can fund you, but I have no say in where you're going to be for Seder, where you're going to be Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where you're going to break the fast. I have to fund your kids' tuition, but I have no say in what school you send them to. There's an inherent tension. It's inherent in our lifestyle as Orthodox Jews. Not because we're doing anything wrong. And it causes tremendous tension. And if I'm bound and I can't cut the cord to my mother and father, by definition that inhibits the quality of my relationship with my wife. And vice versa. Throw something else onto this. And I'm speaking now about micro-demographics in our world, in the Torah world. How many of you are familiar with the Persian Jewish community? As you know, any Iranian Jew who could afford to, after the Shah was overthrown in 79, and they fled the Ayatollahs, most of them either moved to Beverly Hills or to Great Neck, Long Island, not to Israel. So most of the Teherani, the Kashanian, the Shirazi, the Isfahani community has transplanted itself here in America. The Syrian Jewish community, both the Shamis from Damascus and the Halabis from Aleppo. How about those of us, which I'm sure many of us in this room are, who are children of Holocaust survivors? I don't know if you know Rabbi Dr. Johnny Krug. He himself is a child of survivors, as is his wife Phyllis. And he had the opportunity that when he got his PhD in psychology, it was the late 70s, he decided to do it on something that spoke to him because it hit home, was separation anxiety amongst survivors. Now, he assumed that the separation anxiety would be much more significant than average. But what his PhD showed, their separation anxiety is off the bell curve. Can you imagine this? You lost your first family before the war. Or the last time you ever saw your parent who was being deported, begged you to look after your younger sister. Please swear to me you're going to protect your younger brother or sister. And you did everything humanly possible. But eventually you couldn't protect them. And that child was deported. Now you have children after the war. Do you think you're going to treat those children like a typical American or a typical American Jew treats their children? Not a chance. You know how they treat those children? They're like a china doll. They stick them in a glass cabinet, they lock the cabinet and throw away the key. Because God forbid you take that china doll out. You let them have the kind of experiences that most normal kids have. They could break and crush into 1,000 pieces. And that's not just paranoia, because you lived through it, because you lost your first children, or you lost your younger siblings. When it came time to, quote unquote, go to Israel to learn for the year, or to go away to university, or to get married, do you think emotionally and psychologically the parents allowed them to do it? And the guilt that these kids suffer for what they're doing to their parents, causing them to relive all the horrors of the 1940s? And as you know, and I'm sure many of you are children of survivors. Yeah? It's one thing when we looked at parents when we were kids, but now that we're those parents, we are reliving the home that we were raised in. Our community particularly has real challenges with boundaries. And it hurts our marriages, and that was reflected in this survey. Number 3, more than religious differences, more than intimacy issues, problems in the bedroom, more than boundary issues, the number 3 challenge that we have in the Orthodox community, and this spanned all the groups, is financial stress. Financial stress. The therapists say the following. We as human beings, we all know from the Chumash, from Bereshis, we're the only one created b'tselem Elokim. We are God's Mona Lisa. We are the Ribono Shel Olam's Mona Lisa. He created us in a way that what we are capable of is unfathomable. And one of the areas is, God forbid, a person suffers a tragedy. That person will always have scar tissue. That person will always have baggage from it. But the human being has this ability to rebuild their lives, to move forward in the aftermath of a tragedy, and to live another 10, 20, 40 years. That's true. We can withstand some of the worst challenges as human beings. But you know what the therapists teach us? You know what we are not built to withstand? What we're incapable of withstanding? Chronic stress. What is chronic stress? Day in, day out. Week in, week out. Month in, month out. Year in, year out. That destroys us. One of the greatest chronic stresses, and particularly in the Orthodox community, is financial stress. It destroys a marriage. A marriage that may not be perfect, a marriage that may not be an ideal marriage, but years of chronic stress will break that marriage. That same marriage without the financial stress, without the chronic financial stress, could have survived. That will break it. There's a blog. I happen to live in Teaneck, New Jersey. It's a suburb of New York. Our offices are on Wall Street. And Teaneck, like many Orthodox communities, has exploded. So it's no longer Teaneck. It's totally taken over Bergenfield, New Milford. Very much like you see, for instance, that there used to be an area between Flatbush and Borough Park that was a very strong concentration of Italians. Today, it's all Jewish, from Borough Park to Flatbush. And that's true in many communities. So in Bergenfield, where the real estate taxes are a bit cheaper, in Bergenfield, where the size of houses are smaller than Teaneck, a family moves there. And this family, I don't know who they are, but they're known to the world as 200K chump. 200K chump. What's the nature of their blog? Both he and she are working. They have 4 kids in yeshiva. Some of them are older, some of them are younger. So they're making in the top, today it's the top 4 percentile. The time they started the blog, it was the top 3 percentile of all American earners. They're paying over $80,000 a year in yeshiva tuition after tax. They don't get a new Honda Odyssey every 3 years on a new lease. They're driving the 10-year-old minivan clunker. They don't live in Teaneck. They live in Bergenfield, which is cheaper housing, cheaper taxes, and they can't survive. The top third, today it's the top 4% of all American earners, and they can't survive. Not because they're living high on the hog. This is a challenge. We have a problem as Orthodox Jews. You'll laugh at this, but over 70% of us live in the tri-state area. If we could only get the Jews out of New York, think about the impact we could have on American civilization. And then if you include Los Angeles, which is more expensive to live than New York, you include Chicago, you're looking at well over 80% of the Orthodox Jewish community in those areas. We've set ourselves up financially with a model that doesn't work. That's a challenge. Number 2, more than religious differences, intimacy issues, more than boundary issues, more than financial chronic stress. You know what the number 2 issue was? Time. 22% of all those in the survey said the following: we don't spend enough time with each other. We as Americans have been the victims of a great lie. A lie has been perpetrated, not just to Jews, to Americans. You know what that lie is? I think you've all heard it. And we were raised to believe it's the gospel. Sorry, wrong religion here. We were raised to believe that supposedly this is the truth. What is that? Quality time. You know what? We really don't spend a lot of time with each other. But every other Wednesday night, we're going to have a date night. We're going to make up quality time. I'm traveling all the time. I'm never with my kids, but that's okay. Because Sunday afternoon, after yeshiva, I'm going to take this kid out for an hour. We're going to get a Slurpee, and we're going to do this. Quality time. I can substitute for quantity time with quality time. Sheker v'chazov. It's a lie. It's a lie. There's no basis for such a thing. The Achronim asked the following question. When the Torah and Mishpatim lays out the categories in which a husband is responsible to his beloved, to his Ezer Kenegdo, She'era, Ksusa, Ve'onasa. So She'er is the standard of living she had as a single woman in terms of expense budget, etc. Ksus, the chasos, is the shelter budget. It means her clothing budget, meaning if you marry someone who shopped at Neiman Marcus, it's a little different than if you marry someone who shops at Kmart. Your responsibilities financially. And that's true not only the clothing budget, it's true of the shelter budget. Square footage, the kind of house, quality of housing. What's Ona? So Ona is referring to the emotional/conjugal responsibility, the conjugal responsibility that a husband has, and the Ramban develops it. He refers to the foreplay, the verbal foreplay leading up, going up the mountain. He talks about the epilogue going down the mountain. The Menorah Salor talks about it. But the Achronim asked the following question: why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu not use a different term for intimacy? Throughout the Mishnayos, in the Toseftos that we have in Masechta Ksubas, and throughout Nashim, the rabbis have these beautiful terms. They're euphemisms. Bia, tashmish. They're these clean euphemisms for intimacy. Why didn't the Rebbe Shalom use that? What kind of word is ona? Ayin vav nun he. What was God's word for intimacy? Translate the word. Ayin vav nun he. Ona. What does that mean? Time. And you know how they answer? Because that's the basic responsibility. The primary chiyuv is to be there with one's spouse. It's to be there. So certain times of the month, it may manifest itself differently than other times of the month. But that's the responsibility. Quantity, time. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge in terms of our workday. It's a challenge. I mean, think about our grandparents. Our grandparents and great-grandparents did not have the kind of psychological knowledge that we have. I'm not referring to those of you who have a PhD in psychology. I'm talking about any of us who's just been given a good education. Anyone who reads the Science Times, the New York Times on a Tuesday, that's been given a non-superficial, a thoughtful education, where we know how the unconscious works, how the subconscious works. We have an appreciation for nuance and subtlety and personality and body language, all kinds of psychological issues. And you want to know something? As a generalization, they had better marriages than we do. What did they know from psychological knowledge? Nothing. But they have better marriages than we do. You know why? They spent time with each other. What did they have? There were no phones. They had 3 Verstunkene channels that went off the air after the 11 o'clock news. And if they were on the air, you weren't interested in watching what was on there anyways. Their life forced them to dialogue with each other, to make eye contact with each other, to read each other's body language. That was 22%. And number 1, more than religious differences, more than intimacy, more than boundaries, more than financial stress, and more than time, the number 1 challenge in our community, 23% said, communication. Communication. And this was fascinating. Just let me show my hands for a second. A total disconnect in both directions. What did the men say? I asked a simple question. It's a yes or no. What do I get in return? A PhD thesis. Women, it says, the Targum teaches us what makes the human being unique. Ruach mimalala. We have the ability. What makes a human a human? We have the ability to articulate abstract ideas, thoughts, concepts. And you know what? That's true when it comes to women. But men, rams, bulls, men, all the same thing. They grunt. Yes? No. What? Oh, it's your birthday? Maybe you'll get a full English sentence, but don't you dare expect a paragraph. Women just felt frustrated. There is no expression, articulation. There's no emotional communication. And the men say she talks too much. I'll give you an example. I quote someone who was one of my predecessor and a mentor to many of us at the OU, Rabbi Tzvi Weinrib. Rabbi Weinrib is a rabbi in Shomrei Emunah in Baltimore and was a psychologist.